In this week's Torah portion, Vayechi, we reach the conclusion of the story of Joseph and indeed of the whole book of Genesis. And after moving to Egypt to be with his son Joseph, Jacob was ready to die, so he set about giving his son the blessing that he had always intended to give him, the blessing of the firstborn. The blessing of the firstborn is a double portion blessing, but rather than simply pronouncing it over Joseph, Jacob gave it to him through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. In fact, Jacob declared that he would adopt them. And by adopting Ephraim and Manasseh, not only did it ensure that, in a sense, Joseph would receive the double portion blessing of the firstborn, but it also ensured that Ephraim and Manasseh and their descendants would be a legitimate part of the family of Israel. When Joseph then brought his sons Ephraim and Manasseh to Jacob, something interesting happened. Jacob said, "Who are these?" And as we explored in the previous portions, it is safe to assume in all the years that went by, Joseph had not abandoned his morals or his faith in God, but he did likely become assimilated into Egyptian culture in many ways. At the very least, because of his position as second in command over Egypt, and because he had married an Egyptian woman, Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were, for all intents and purposes, Egyptians. And when Jacob saw the boys, he likely could not differentiate them from any other Egyptian young men their age. And Joseph clarified who they were, and Jacob gladly blessed them and adopted them. Joseph's sons were now his adopted brothers. They were legitimate members of the family of Israel. And interestingly, the adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh informs the adoption that we Gentile believers of Jesus experience. Ephraim and Manasseh did not have Israelite heritage through their mother, nor did they outwardly look like Israelites. And on those two grounds, they had no claim to the blessings that Jacob was offering. It was only because Joseph brought Ephraim and Manasseh to his father, that they were able to receive the blessings and the adoption. And all of this describes our situation as Gentile believers. When it comes to receiving salvation, we Gentile believers do not get to rely on our heritage or any outward markers. And like Ephraim and Manasseh, it is only because we are brought to the Father by Jesus that we have any right to receive adoption into the family of God. Later in Genesis 49, we are then told about how Jacob prophesied over all of his sons, and of particular interest are the words he spoke concerning Judah. Jacob said that the scepter shall not depart from Judah. And this is a reference to the fact that from the tribe of Judah would come the legitimate kings of Israel, ultimately referring to the Messiah. And Jacob went on to say about Judah, "To him shall be the obedience of the peoples." And again, this is ultimately a reference to the Messiah, that to the Messiah the Gentiles would pledge their allegiance. But taken more broadly, the prophecy here implies that in addition to Jesus and the apostles, it's appropriate for Gentile believers to look to the tribe of Judah as an authority regarding how we are to obey God. Indeed, it's only been the Jewish people who have been continuously keeping the Torah for the past 2,000 years. It is their interpretations and traditions handed down over the centuries that should hold weight for Gentile followers of Jesus. And one such tradition is how the Jewish people bless their children on Friday nights. To help usher in the Sabbath, traditionally, fathers place their hands on the heads of their children and they utter these words, "May God establish you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And this tradition comes from this week's Torah portion. Right after Jacob had blessed and adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, it says this in Genesis 48. He blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And by pronouncing this blessing over our children, we are declaring our intention, that is our prayer, that God would work within the hearts of our children to help them come to a place when they will also be included in the family of Israel, just as Ephraim and Manasseh were. Indeed, the whole story of Joseph has shown us that out of a bad situation can emerge a wonderful outcome. If it were not for the fact that Joseph's brothers betrayed Joseph and caused him to go to Egypt, it's possible that many people from around the known world would have died, and there never would have been a precedent set in Ephraim and Manasseh for the inclusion of foreigners into the family of Israel. But as Joseph said to his brothers, You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about the present result to preserve many people alive. And the same is true of the greater story of Jesus and the Jewish people, and also the inclusion of the Gentile believers. If it were not for the fact that Jesus was rejected as the Messiah by the majority of the Jewish people, salvation probably would not have spread throughout the world as it has over the centuries. But as I said last week, this is not the end of the story. Just as Joseph's brothers were reunited with Joseph, so too will the Jewish people be reunited and gathered to Jesus. Indeed, God's intention is to bring salvation to the whole world, both to his people Israel and to anyone from any nation who chooses to embrace him through his son, Jesus the Messiah.